India has a diverse manufacturing landscape and centuries-old traditions of craftsmanship and has become a global hub for sourcing across various industries. Um, Today's podcast is with Sarah Collins, who is an expert in ethical production and supports brands through that process and has just returned from an extensive sourcing trip in India. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be chatting about the best types of products to source from India, the cultural differences, and all things manufacturing and production. So, Sarah, thank you for joining me again. You've been a previous guest on the podcast. But for people that don't know who you are or what you do, can you just give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, thanks for having me back. So, yes, I'm an ethical production consultant. I work with small and medium businesses with their manufacturing, anything under that manufacturing model with a focus on ethics and sustainability. I come from a Fairtrade background and I carry those values through the practice. But I work a lot in India, but I work internationally as well around the world with the brands depending on their own needs.
You've just come back from a very extensive 4-week trip to India where you brought people from the UK and elsewhere with you for that trip. What if people are looking to source products from India? What is India good at? What are the things that it's well known for?
Yeah, I think my mind straight away goes to cotton. I mean, a lot of the world's cotton is produced in India. I think there's such a history and beautiful craft of cotton production that comes out of India. I mean, from handloom, but to hand spun, hand woven. And then obviously there's huge scale mill made cotton as well in India. So I think if you are specifically looking at wovens and you want to use those natural fibers, then India is a really, really strong place to work. But I mean, there's so much that comes from India. It's such a huge, vast country. I mean, if we're thinking about crafts, hand embroidery, if you ever wanted hand embroidery items, like India is such a beautiful place to do that. Leather work is really strong in India. But also, India is, like you're saying, it's a global manufacturing hub. I mean, they really are coming on and really advanced in all sorts of manufacturing now. I mean, there's definitely still some countries around the world are stronger in other areas, but I mean, the scale of the manufacturing in India at the moment is huge. So I think there's a lot you can get there, but if you are looking at woven garments and cottons, then India is just such a fantastic place to work for that.
And then when people see those like block prints, and that's very much
Yeah.
a signature of Indian manufacture, and also embellishment is really. I mean, I know you touched on hand embroidery, but like embellishment is really good from there as well. For if we were talking about mainly about clothing, then that is. But I know you when you were on the trip, you saw some jewelry manufacturers as well, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. And in terms of finding the right suppliers in India, but if people are looking for suppliers in India, where should they start?
I mean, everyone goes to Google and there's lots of manufacturers there, but you can find yourself in a bit of a rabbit hole just searching and searching. I mean, lots of suppliers are on Instagram now. I think there's really good platforms online that have a lot of manufacturers that you can access, like Common Objective. If you've heard of them, they list a lot of suppliers, and within that, they share what their sustainable values are. But there's always that need to do your own work as well in those spaces. A lot of information. If we went back like 10, I mean, you'll know, but if you went back like 10 or so years, it was really hard to come across manufacturers. But it's not as difficult to find them now through the internet, through social media, through platforms like Common Objective, but it's actually doing the work once you know who they are. Yeah, it's like, are they right for you? Are they right for your business? Just because they say they can do one thing on their website doesn't mean that they're the right business partner for you. So, yeah, I think a bit of online searching, but then digging a bit deeper once you find that those contacts. Really, yeah, it's really important to do that work.
And then what criteria should you be looking at then to narrow that down to find out if they're the right fit for you?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm doing this with clients, quite a lot I do this exercise with clients, and we start with what their business values are. So what are they looking for? What values do they want carried through their manufacturing models? Because I'm a strong believer that what we practice in our own business, we want to see that represented through our business partnerships that we're creating as well. So I think starting with that's really important. So that could be understanding whether you want to work with, like what practices are important. You don't have to be like, you should understand ethical production, I guess, but I mean, like, you don't have to be an expert in it, but it's like, obviously maybe it's like we want a living wage, maybe we want to see women in leadership, maybe we want, like just understanding any of those core values. And then it's about the relationship side with the suppliers. So do you connect with them positively when you're speaking with them? It's not just emails back and forth, like, can you have a call? How's the human to human connection? And then we have to dig deeper and we need to look at the quality that they're producing. It's always really interesting to see who they might be working with already. Are they aligned with your brand? Do we want to be working with someone that, do we recognize any of the brands that they're working with? And do those brands carry the values that your business has? So that there's some like alignment there. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I think there's the value side of it, but then there's also the practical side. So like, do they produce at the scale that you need to produce? Do they have access to the fabrics at the minimums that you can work with? Lead times, like all those practical things as well. But we need, it's kind of doing the work in terms of ethical practices, the relationship side of it, and then do they actually meet your business needs in terms of quantities and so on.
And with sourcing with India, what are the common pitfalls or challenges people come across?
Yeah, I mean, I think really the challenges and pitfalls, to me, from my experience anywhere, that you find in India, you find everywhere else as well. Like, I think it's like manufacturing has these issues, and it could be communication issues, it could be like delays and lead times. I would say that lead times in India do generally tend to be longer than, say, if you're working in China. They kind of they're much they're quicker in their turnaround times. So I think you need to plan a bit more in advance when you are working with India. I think things like, depending on what you're doing, so if you are working with block print, you need to be really aware of like the wet season, and some of these methods are done really traditionally still. So when everything's wet, like the dyes, the fabrics aren't drying, and they don't have as much access. So like weather is important. Holiday seasons, like India has a lot of celebrations, and it's really important to be aware of, say, those religious festivals, and obviously respecting that as well, but just planning it into your timelines, because so many people get caught out by that, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize that everything kind of is going to be shut down for the next 2 weeks. And once you can work with a supplier on those things, then I think it's fine. But it's a lot of planning in advance, I would say, when you work in India.
We touched a little bit on the cultural considerations. What about on the communication side? And I just know from my own experience, and not to stereotype, but when I've worked with a lot of um, Chinese factories, they're very black and white in terms of trying to find a way around a problem. But then with Indian factories I've worked with, they'll always say yes, even though they'll often say yes that they can do something or that everything is possible. Like, well, actually, it's probably really isn't. What is there anything that and that cultural side of things that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, I would say that that's like, yeah, I agree with kind of what you're saying there. I think that is a big thing with India, and I think it comes from like a lot of the relationships that, like, the focus that I always focus on when I'm working in India, it's building that relationship as genuine relationships. Like, they want partnerships that are built on trust. And I think there is an eager to please.
Yeah.
And I think culturally, like, that it's not so direct. So they'll kind of avoid no. And again, this is kind of generalizing, because I definitely work with some suppliers in India where they are a lot more direct. And I think that's, from how their businesses have developed. But I think generally it's that kind of avoidance of the word no. And it's a real politeness, and there's a real like respect focus on those relationships. So I think understanding that and, appreciating it, but understanding it and almost like reading between the lines, and maybe changing the way you're asking questions, and, kind of phrasing it in a way of like, is this an issue? Like, do we need to find an alternative for this? Or, what are the like what's coming up here when we're doing this, and like just finding and like just kind of being aware that, and it's not because they're trying to pull the wool over on anyone's eyes. It's just it's that real kind of wanting to have this positive relationship with the brand and thinking, okay, we're going to do our best, but sometimes you just need to be told no so that you know where you stand. I think it's really good to kind of lay your cards out as well and say like, actually, this is my ideal scenario, but if this can't work, like I'm willing to work with you to find a solution, or what, we can problem solve together. And I'm always really transparent with suppliers, and you know we really want to work together positively. Like, how can we do this? And like, please tell me if this isn't going to work. Like, I
Yeah.
had an issue with a supplier yesterday where something had gone wrong, and I was like, but on behalf of a client, I was like this just isn't going to work. And it was like a panic on their side, so they were like, let's get on the call. So we spoke about it, and we just problem solved together, like, okay, well, how about we do this method instead of that? And it was absolutely fine. And that's what I love about working with suppliers, when it is that mutual respect and we're in it together. It's knowing that you can just get on a call and you can problem solve together and come up with a solution. And it's not this back and forth like cold exchange, which you can get as standard practice in some other countries.
And you've been sourcing from India for many years. How have you seen it change over the last, 2 to 3 years?
This trip that I've been on, it had been quite a gap since I'd been to India. When I first started going in 2010 or 2011, and then I was going pretty frequently. But since sort of like COVID and things, I hadn't gone as frequent, which is why I made this such like a longer trip. Um, and I did see a change, and I do think there's a real push for sustainability as well in practices. I mean, I think that it's expanding anyway into like such a huge, like it already has been a global manufacturing hub, but I think we're seeing more developments, we're seeing more technology implemented into the larger factories. I saw a lot of more purpose-built factories that are purpose-built to really kind of meet those standards of, say, GOTS organic, or like other accreditations that factories are really wanting to be part of. So they're building these purpose factories that are solar panelled, reusing water, really spacious. There's like clear walking ways. So I think it is evolving, and I think there's a real, well, it's just a huge business growth, and I think they're expanding in a lot of different areas of production as well in the fashion sector.
And we talked a little bit about the sourcing trip that you recently did, where you brought brand founders, people who had either started a brand or wanted to start a brand from the UK and, like I said, other countries. Tell me how that came about and what that involved.
Yeah, I mean, that was something I was wanting to do for such a long time, and I was hesitant, and then I just went for it at the beginning of last year. And it was really what I love about working with suppliers is that in-person connection. So I've brought it up a couple of times already, but it's that kind of human to human, building relationships. I think when we're working in our businesses, it's the manufacturers are such a huge part of that, and there's such an extension of how we work. And I think, I've been on so many trips independently over the years where I've seen firsthand, and I've done it in employment, of like the the amount of work you can get done by being there is incredible compared to what you do on email. I mean, it's amazing that we can do so much digitally, but you can get so much done in person. But also, those relationships become so much stronger and deeper, and you really understand the limitations of the supplier or what they're working in, and actually you can work with them on that. So, and then speaking to clients, I really felt the need to kind of share that experience. And also, I've had suppliers and clients in the past be sort of nervous to go out on their own, like they've never been to India before, they feel a bit uneasy, and they're like never met a supplier in person before. So I kind of thought, to get away from our screens and actually host something where a small group of us could go to India and meet lots of different suppliers, and really wanted to show the realities of ethical production. And it's not just like a tick box exercise. It's like what work is being done in factories to meet those standards. And, I designed the trip so that we were seeing artisan production versus small scale units versus like a large factory that produces the well recognized brands in the UK, so that people could really understand the different scales and the different models of production in India. So that's kind of why I did it. And yeah, it was really incredible.
And what do you think that those people that you brought with you who had never been to India before, what do you think they were most surprised by?
It was really funny because I think pretty much everyone who hadn't been to India before on the trip they were surprised at how, not easy is not the right word, but they just had this vision that things were going to be so hectic and so stressful, but actually it wasn't that. And I think they were really surprised at seeing how production and how fashion and jewellery as well, like you said,
Yeah.
we went to see some jewellery manufacturing, like how it's actually done and the different setups. I got the impression that people felt really like, what's the word, like they kind of just felt they learned a lot they were surprised at different ways of working. I think a lot of people just think big factory, lots of
Yeah.
sewing machines, huge tables, and that's how fashion is made, and it is made like that by the majority around the world, but there's other ways of doing it as well. There's many different models of
Yeah.
manufacturing. So I think that was a big takeaway. And I also think that yeah, people hopefully from the feedback, people felt really inspired, and just, people were writing notes daily on what they were thinking and ideas. And I feel like it was such a good week for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing better than going to see how something is made, and like you said, getting out of your bubble, going to see how something is made, building that relationship. But then, and because the inspiration that sparks when you might see something that they're producing, you're like, actually, yeah, that's given me an idea for X, Y, Z, and it is very much inspiring. I really miss going to factories. I used to do it as part of my job as a buyer, and just seeing how things are made and then being able to problem solve or troubleshoot because you understand the manufacturing process more.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. And I think you can have this idea in your head and you're sending off emails and you're getting on Zoom calls, or like whatever you're doing with your supplier. And it's great. Like, it is brilliant that we can work in that way. But then sometimes when you are there, you're like, oh, I get that now. I get why that has to be that way. And I understand that this is the process. And maybe I'm going to check in at these stages because I know that this is that check-in point and I'm good. And you just come away with so much knowledge and understanding. And that again strengthens that relationship with the supplier because you understand what their experience and on their end, and the inspiration side of it. I mean, I think that's one thing I took away from the trip is we did so much, and actually I think you need time to let it process as well. I mean, all of us were saying we couldn't sleep on the night because our minds were buzzing with excitement. So much that you see, and then the next day you're up early and out again. But um, yeah, but it was really nice that there was a group of us there to bounce those ideas from, and so yeah, it was just yeah, it was a really great week.
And is it something that you are going to do again?
Yes, I think that's the first time I'm saying like yes really confidently. I will do it again. I've kind of been like maybe, um, but it was such a we had such a great time, and I think I will keep it relatively small. Like, I think it works well because there's a nice group and there's enough time for everybody to get what they need from it. So I'm taking from the experience that I had. I'm doing some learnings. I'm probably going to make a few small tweaks, and I probably will look at hosting it again. And I'll be launching, like, sharing dates for that in the not too distant future, like maybe in a month or two. I might have some dates in mind. But yeah, if anyone's interested, I think definitely keep an eye out.
And how can people work with you, Sarah?
Yeah, so I work with brands in a number of ways, but predominantly it's through consultancy, so guiding people through the sourcing, the sampling, and the production process with the ethics and sustainability practices, or I do more in-depth projects and sourcing projects for brands. So I would say to check out my Instagram. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me, and I can arrange discovery calls with anyone to understand whether my services are what they're looking for.
And I'll put those details of your website and your Instagram in the show notes for people to check out. But Sarah, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll be back again next week with another great guest.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.